The easiest way to learn about square roots is going to be just to practice square roots. So what are we doing when we take the square root of a number like 16? Well, we're trying to figure out what number multiplied by itself equals 16. Or in other words, what number squared equals 16. And that number would be 4. So 4 times 4 would equal 16. But also, -4 times -4 would also equal 16. So we put this plus or minus sign in the beginning here, and our answer would be 4 plus or minus 4. Now, what else are we doing? What's the better way to think about this? What the square root is really doing is, if we take 4 and multiply it by 4, what are we doing to that number? We're squaring it. 4 times 4 is the same thing as 4 squared. So when you take the square root, and of course both of these equal 16. So when you take the square root of 16, this is the equivalent of taking the square root of 4 squared. And what our square root is doing is it's undoing the square. The square root and the square are canceling each other. And you're just left with 4, plus or minus. And that's a big thing to remember, because if you forget that plus or minus, you're going to end up getting the answer wrong. So let's do a couple more examples. If you take the square root of 36, first thing I would do is put this plus or minus in here to try and remind myself once it's time to actually give the answer, and put the plus or minus in the beginning. So what times itself equals 36? 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Or in other words, 6 squared, which is 6 times 6. So 36 and 6 squared are equal. And we're taking the square root of this number. And the square and a square root cancel each other out. And we're left with plus or minus 6. How about the square root of 81? Again, plus or minus sign, very important. What times what equals 81? Or what number squared equals 81? 9 times 9 is 81. Or in other words, 9 squared is the equivalent of 81. And we're taking the square root of it. The square and the square root cancel, and we're just left with our 9. Plus or minus. Square root of 100. Plus or minus sign. Now what number times itself equals 100? And that would be 10. So 10 squared is equal to 100. And we're taking the square root of that number, which is undoing our square, and leaving us with just the 10 plus or minus 10. Now what if we don't have a nice clean number like that? What it means is we don't have a perfect square, but we can still get an answer that you'll end up just rounding the number essentially. So what if you get something like the square root of 6? It's still going to have our plus or minus sign in the front here, except we're not going to get a perfect number. If you put it into your calculator and round it to 2 decimal places, you're going to get 2.45. Again though, don't forget plus or minus. So this would be considered not a perfect square. Alright guys, thank you for watching. If you have any more questions, please leave them down below.